This time cycle in this video, we are looking at what is inflation and hyperinflation. So first of all, let's look at inflation. As inflation is a quantitative measure of the rate at which the average price level of goods and services will rise over a given time. So this means that it increases your cost of living and reduces the purchasing power of each currency. For example, the average price of white bread in 1980 was 34 pence, whereas now it costs over £1. Now, to combat inflation, a country's appropriate monetary authority, like the central bank, will take the necessary measures to try and keep inflation within permissible limits, which is usually around 2%, and to keep the economy running smoothly. So next, let's look at the causes of inflation. As inflation is classified into three types. We have demand pull inflation, cost push inflation, and built-in inflation. Now, demand pull inflation occurs when the overall demand for goods and services in an economy increases quicker than the economy's production capacity. So this means that there is a higher demand and lower supply, and therefore buyers are willing to pay higher prices for the product. So this happens with oil when oil-producing nations decide to cut down on oil production, and this results in price rises and contributes to inflation. Additionally, an increase in money supply in an economy results to inflation because there is more money available to individuals, and this results in higher spending and price rises. Now, cost push effect is the result of the increase in the prices of production. For example, an increase in labour costs or the cost of a raw material will lead to a higher cost for the finished product and contribute to inflation. Now, built-in inflation is as the price of goods and services rise, the employees will also expect wage rises, and wage increases nationally will consequently result in higher costs of goods and services, and this wage price spiral will continue. Next, we need to look at the types of inflation indexes. As the most common ways to measure inflation are the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, and the Wholesale Price Index, the WPI. Now, the US Bureau of Labor Statistics uses the CPI to measure inflation, and it records the prices of 80,000 consumer items each month, and this CPI will tell you the general rate of inflation. Now, the change of inflation can then be measured by the final CPI divided by the initial CPI value. Now, the Wholesale Price Index measures and tracks the changes in the price of goods before the retail level. For example, this will include products like cotton prices. So now let's look at the pros and cons of inflation, as inflation can be deemed as either a positive or a negative depending on your situation. For example, individuals with lots of tangible assets like property will see inflation as a positive thing because it raises the value of their assets, which they can then sell at a higher rate. On the other hand, people holding cash may not like inflation because it reduces the value of their holdings. An optimum level of inflation, though, is required to promote spending to a certain extent instead of saving, and this therefore keeps the economy moving. Now, if the rate of inflation is excessive, though, it may lead to unemployment and promote people stockpiling and buying goods at the earliest amid fears of price rises, and this will only see the price rising further. Now, this leads us nicely onto hyperinflation, as hyperinflation is when the prices of goods and services rise more than 50% per month. Now, the two main causes of this are an increase in the money supply and demand pull inflation. Now, it starts when a country's government starts printing money to pay for its spending, and then instead of tightening the money to stop inflation, the government keeps printing more. Now, this means that as there is too much currency around, prices will skyrocket. So countries that have suffered horrendous inflation rates include Germany, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, and the United States during the Civil War. Now, Venezuela is still trying to cope with the effects of hyperinflation in the present day. But Germany was the most well-known example, as they printed money to pay for World War I, and this meant that the government started printing more and more money, and this led to inflation rates of 20.9% every day. So thanks for watching. If you click on my website link in the description, there is a link which will give you a free share of up to £100 if you follow the instructions. But thanks for watching and see you soon. Bye.